Hi, and it's another Gardening Friday here on Mansfield Today. And we're going to be talking about trends in garden design, whether we should be looking at being more naturalistic, or some people just might think it's being scruffy. And of course, what we should be doing in a water-stressed country such as South Africa. So, joining us from somewhere in the middle of nowhere near Falwater, I believe, we have Paul Odendaal from Paul Odendaal Designs. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Melanie. How are you
Excellent. I'm
doing
glad to
this
hear that.
afternoon?
I'm always good, I mean, as long as I'm warm and it's not pouring with rain and not too cold, well, then life is good. What can I say? But you're probably feeling the heat where you are at the moment. Is it dry and dusty in the area? I know that the area you're in is like usually got not a lot of water.
So about a week ago, they had 18 millimeters of rain within a very short period. So the water holes is nice and filled up. But as winter, as everybody else can see in Joburg as well, it's been a lot colder than what it's been. So the plants are a little bit late in terms of shedding their leaves. But I'm sitting underneath the cereus here that's in full flower, and the bees are going ballistic because there is literally very little food around for them. So it's absolutely picturestic where I'm sitting in the middle of the bushveld, and we've got a very dry site where we also only have a water borehole right down in the one corner of the reserve that actually feeds basically all the sites within the reserve. So hence it's so pertinent that we're talking about water-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live in a water-stressed country, and especially when we see with the drought that's been happening in the Eastern Cape and the drought a couple of years in the Cape itself, the Western Cape, even in Johannesburg, where our dam levels go straight down. But people want to have water available just to keep their gardens looking good. And why not? I mean, it's something that we want to do. We want to be outside in South Africa. But what are some of the things that people can do to actually lessen their load on the water system?
Well, first of all, climate change has really brought it on quite a bit. This morning, it was actually frightening listening to Sydney, where they're busy having floods at the moment, which you don't particularly think of that as well, compared to even the floods that we had in Natal and all of that. So it really is, first of all, how do you manage your water? And a lot of us are actually too eager, too keen to just put the irrigation on for another 5 minutes or 5 minutes every day. And that is the worst thing that one can actually do, because in order to really have a water-wise garden, you need to train your plants how to deal with stress and how to actually deal with water by having a deep root system that know that they can find their water down below and not in the top 5 centimeters of your soil, because it's not going to stay there for very long. So if it is really hot and dry, you just immediately see that effect, and that's when we all rush and we actually go and put our sprinklers on. And I mean, you actually can train your plants from roses right through to clematis, right through to any plant to actually know, well, listen, I'm going to get water, I'm going to get it for quite some time, and then after that it's going to be not available. So I need to make sure that I can actually find it, and I can find it down below. I shouldn't be running my roots on top of the soil trying to go and scour for what is up at the top, because that's when we start having problems.
So when it comes to actually designing yourself, do you go for the more water-wise options, or do you always have to go with what your client really wants in their way of a favorite flower?
Well, it's a little bit of both. As a professionalist that's supplying my services, I need to advise what is possibly the best. But being a plants person myself, for me, it's the right plant for the right condition, um, and hearing what the client wants. Because at the end of the day, the garden design comes down to a personal touch in terms of even for the client, because he got he got a professional in to listen to what he wants, and to then formulate a dream plan for him that he can sort of say, you know what, at the end of the day, this was my dream, and I got this professional person in to actually design it accordingly. And so, Melanie, as a professional, one has to manage your client's expectations and tell them, really, listen, this is doable, or actually, you know what, this is not doable, and not necessarily be a pushover. Because yes, it is quite frantic to actually know all our major cities in South Africa are not really actually close to water sources. Johannesburg is getting it from Lesotho via the Vaal Dam, via the Vaal River, and it's a long way to actually have it where if you look internationally, mostly cities was built very close to water sources. So it's scary to think, but it might at one stage literally come to in terms of, okay, well, you know what? Like they had in Cape Town, you got water to make sure that your house is working. Garden-wise, if you've got a borehole, you're going to be restricted. And it was really sad to be living in Cape Town during those times. For me, as a young professionalism, just starting my business, it was devastating seeing our plants die in front of you. And even your normal indigenous plants that all of a sudden they couldn't cope. And then you think, okay, well, let's plant the succulents, and you do the succulents, and then comes the winter again, and then the natural rain that usually would fall, and you start over again. But that's part of living with nature and actually understanding where is it coming from and managing your expectations and helping your client to manage their expectations.
So basically, the thing to do, obviously, is when you're designing in a specific area, like on the Highveld, you want to try and keep as much to the kind of plant material that you would find in the area. So, I mean, having a tropical garden is fantastic if you have a borehole and you don't worry about the water levels underneath the ground. But you're not going to have a tropical garden if you haven't got access to water. So when it comes to having the style of garden, I mean, is it still possible to have like a formal garden, for instance, using endemic plants? Because usually people are saying, oh no, the indigenous and endemic plants, they're so scruffy, they just don't look good. So they're great for a natural garden, but could you change their way of thinking, not just the plants, but the people, to say, well, we can use these plants instead of using like boxwood, using something like a helichrysum to create a hedge?
So yes, one can look at that as well, but at the same time, we are blessed within South Africa to have a smorgasbord of plants that we can use, being endemic and being indigenous, but also looking at various other climates that are similar to us, that is, first of all, non-invasive, and can deal with that factor as well. Because yes, unfortunately, there are some of the plants in South Africa that are quite scruffy, but a Freylinia can do quite a nice hedge. And sometimes we tend to forget, for instance, yellowwood, but now there might be people that might shoot me down completely because you're not allowed to clip a yellowwood, but it makes a beautiful hedge. We've done it. Raymond and Keith Kirsten have done it at Delay, where Raymond literally said, well, they've done it overseas for quite some time. Why don't we actually have a yellowwood hedge at Delay, right in front of the restaurant, where we're blocking off this huge 10, 12-meter wall, and you have a clip yellowwood. So yes, it's one of our national trees, and actually our national tree, and you're not supposed to be cutting it down, but I mean, it's a perfect one that can actually be clipped because it's got a fine foliage. So there are certain plants that can allow you to have a beautiful garden design within a certain style that you would like. I mean, at the moment, I'm sitting literally in the bushveld. We don't have a lot of water. I had to resort to, first of all, plants that don't get eaten by animals, number one. Quite tricky, especially if you go in winter and there is nothing else that they can eat. And second of all, we don't have a lot of water. So we resorted to having succulents. And the client, first of all, was not considerably a fan of this thing of having actually succulents, because for him, he's always wanting a lush garden. So I said to him, let's do it this way around. We basically are creating you a coral garden above soil level, using gravel and using succulents, texture, form, and color to actually have a coral garden. From your euphorbias right through to some of your small aloes, to some of your awarthias, sansevieria, where it's a bit more in a shady position, and aloes big and small, and cotyledons, and it actually has turned out quite nicely. It's a year later now down the line, and there's really some areas where you could almost find Nemo above ground.
I like that. Going scuba diving without getting wet. I think that's a fantastic idea. But when it comes to more natural planting, I do think that there has been over the last few years that naturalistic planting style, the veldt, the prairies, the meadows. Do you think that people should be really following that formal garden design as it is, with all that clipping and maintenance and all of that, is kind of lost its way and it should be put to the side for a while? Or is it still very much on trend?
Well, first of all, gardening is a personal journey. As a gardener, you grow with time. As a young, energetic person, you would like to control everything. So then people would just tend on keep on cutting stuff. And as you get older, you realize, but hang on, it's okay to be a bit woolly, but if you've got a mindset in terms of everything has to be 5 centimeters borders right around it, you're going to drive yourself crazy. So that's why the principle was always, in terms of closer to your living space, yes, you can do a little bit more formal, but a lot of people are like naturalistics. Are like, but that's too wild for me. I need to contain it. And you go, but okay, fair enough. Then work within playing in a balance where you have maybe the clip and the unclip. And yes, you go the more natural way. You look in terms of, there's some beautiful gardens that's done in the cradle of humankind where, first of all, yes, the water table was quite high, but at the same time, you are in a grass area between hills and they've used the natural grasses in such a beautiful way. But it's not a botanical zoo where it's one of everything. It's once again, there's design principles in terms of it's planted en masse. Naturalistic worldwide is going quite well, especially in America. They use it and promote it, especially to bring back the insects that one needs, to make sure that food crops actually gets pollinated. We all know that at one stage the East had a problem because there was no bees for their fruit trees, and it was a huge problem. Hence why everybody is looking at going the natural way, rather, where you need to make sure that you do have the birds and the bees coming in and doing what they need to do without going, oh hell, I can't live with this and I need to spray everything dead. Unfortunately, we need to realize there's an ecosystem that we belong into and that we need to please maintain.
Absolutely.
So going the more natural way does help. And yes, as soon as you get closer to the house, there's nothing wrong with having 4 pots that are perfectly clipped into maybe a ball or maybe into a pyramid. But as soon as you get further away, for those guys that does have space, to leave it, to let it be natural. But this also comes with, as I said, with age and with maturity, because some of us are mainly living in apartments, and your dream is to eventually have your own garden. And again, once you have your own garden, you must probably just settle down. So now you just got married, you got kids. So the first thing that you want to do is you actually just want to have lawns so that your kids can actually go and play and just don't have to worry. Or you start getting a garden and you would like to have a dog. Now all of a sudden the dog is starting to dig everywhere else up. So then, like I did in my garden, I then started looking for what can I plant that the dogs actually would not ruin. And it ended up being Satari megalophila, which is one of our indigenous grasses that I think is quite a bit underrated. And at the same time, they were starting to send out their seeds, and I had all the birds coming into the garden. So, sometimes let go and just have the naturalistic coming
just let
close to
it
you,
go.
because it can be quite rewarding.
If the people want to clip and cut things, then buy them a bonsai. Let them get involved in that, and they can prune to their heart's delight, and give them a little Zen garden. I think that's the way to go. Leave everything else alone. Don't give yourself that mission. Paul, thank you so much for joining us from where you are. I hope you don't run out of ideas and water-wise ideas, because that's the way that we should all be looking at it. And we look forward to catching up with you again in the not too distant future.
Thank you. And I'm going to just close up where I'm going to turn the camera around and just give you a quick glimpse of what you can expect in a coral garden, going up, playing with different colors, different forms. Keep on gardening and keep on challenging yourself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And of course, that's it from this week's Mansfield Today gardening slot. We'll be back again with you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like it, let us know.